The morning mist clung to the abandoned lot, like a shroud swirling around the remnants of what once was Miller's hardware store. The building had been demolished months ago, leaving only concrete foundations and memories scattered like the debris that still littered the ground. It was here, in this forgotten corner of Millbrook, that Margaret Chen first spotted the shape lying motionless beside the old oak tree. At first glance, she thought it was a pile of discarded clothing, perhaps another, in casualty of the town's ongoing struggle with homelessness. But as she drew closer, her morning jog coming to an abrupt halt, the shape resolved into something that made her heart skip a beat. A German shepherd, magnificent even in its apparent distress, lay curled beside a weathered brown suitcase. The dog's noble head rested on its paws, and around its eyes was wrapped a dark cloth, a makeshift blindfold that sent chills down Margaret's spine. "Dear God," she whispered, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. The dog's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, confirming he was alive, but something about the scene felt deliberate, staged even. The suitcase sat upright beside the animal, as if placed there with intention rather than abandoned, in haste. Within minutes, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the morning quiet. Margaret had called 911, unsure whether to request police animal control or an ambulance. The dispatcher had promised to send all three as the first patrol car. It pulled up. Officer Rodriguez emerged, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon before he registered the nature of the situation. "Any idea how long he's been here?" Rodriguez asked, crouching down several feet from the dog, the German shepherd's. Ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but the animal made no move to rise or flee. "I jog this route every morning," Margaret replied, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warming sun. "He wasn't here yesterday. I'm certain of that." More vehicles arrived in quick succession. Animal control, another police unit, and curious neighbors drawn by the commotion. A small crowd began to form at the edge of the lot, people whispering among themselves as they tried to make sense of the bizarre tableau. The suitcase drew almost as much attention as the dog itself. It was old, leather brass clasps, tarnished with age. The kind of luggage that spoke of different times of train stations and ocean voyages. Dr. Amanda Torres from the county animal shelter approached with practiced caution, her movements slow and deliberate. She'd seen cases of animal abuse before, but this felt different. More calculated, more cruel in its symbolism. The blindfold wasn't hastily applied. It was carefully tied, the knot positioned behind the dog's head, where he couldn't easily remove it himself. "Easy, boy," she murmured, extending her hand palm up for the dog to scent. "Nobody's going to hurt you." The German shepherd lifted his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he processed her scent. There was no aggression in his posture, no fear-based reactivity that she might have expected from an abused animal. Instead, there was something almost resigned about his demeanor, as if he were waiting for something, or someone should. "We remove the blindfold?" Officer Rodriguez asked his radio, crackling with updates from dispatch. Before Dr. Torres could answer, a commotion erupted from the growing crowd. Someone was pushing through the assembled onlookers, and angry voices rose. In protest, then cutting through the adult protests, like a knife through silk, came the sound of a child crying. Not the typical wail of a frightened youngster, but deep, heartbroken sobs that seemed to carry the weight of the world. The crowd parted, and an 8-year-old girl stumbled into the clearing. Her blonde hair was tangled, her clothes slightly disheveled, as if she'd been running. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged cheeks, and her small chest heaved with the effort of her sobs. But it was her eyes that struck everyone silent, eyes that held recognition, love, and devastating grief, all at once. "Max!" she cried, dropping to her knees several feet from the blindfolded dog. "Oh, Max, what did they do to you?" The effect on the German shepherd was immediate and profound. His head snapped up ears, pricking forward despite the blindfold. A low whine escaped his throat, not of distress, but of recognition and desperate joy. His tail began to thump weakly against the ground, and his entire body seemed to vibrate with contained emotion. "Honey," Dr. Torres said gently, moving toward the girl, "you need to stay back. We don't know if the dog is dangerous." "He's not dangerous," the girl sobbed, anger flashing through her tears. "He's Max, and he's the best dog in the whole world, and someone hurt him." Officer Rodriguez knelt beside the child, his voice soft but professional. "Sweetheart, what's your name? Are your parents here?" "Emily Hartwell," she managed between hiccups. "My grandma's." Coming, she was making breakfast when I saw them bringing him here on the news, and I ran all the way from Maple Street. The crowd murmured at this revelation. Maple Street was nearly a mile away, quite a distance for a little girl to cover on foot. But more intriguing was her claim that the dog's arrival had been on the news. None of the local stations had aired anything yet. The story was barely an hour old. "Emily," Dr. Torres said carefully, "how do you know this dog?" Emily wiped her nose on her sleeve, her small body shaking with emotion. "He saved me," she whispered, "when I was lost in Pinehurst Woods last summer, and it was getting dark, and I was so scared. Max found me and stayed with me all night. He kept me warm and protected me from the scary sounds, and when the search people found us in the morning, he made sure I was okay before he let them take me home." The adults exchanged glances. The Pinehurst Woods rescue had been major news the previous July, a massive search and rescue operation for a missing child that had ended in celebration when she was found safe and unharmed. But the reports had focused on the human rescuers. No one had mentioned a dog, the people who found you. Rodriguez pressed gently. "Did they have a German shepherd with them?" Emily shook her head vigorously. "No, Max was alone. He just appeared when I needed him most." But then her voice trailed off, and fresh tears began to fall. "Then he disappeared again before anyone could see him. I looked for him everywhere, but it was like he was never there." Dr. Torres studied the blindfolded dog with new eyes. His condition suggested long-term care, well-fed, groomed, trained. This wasn't a stray or a feral animal. Someone had been caring for him, and someone had brought him here with deliberate intent. "Emily, you said you saw them bringing him here on the news," Rodriguez said. "Who is them?" The little girl's expression grew troubled, her young face scrunching in concentration. "I don't know. It was like a dream, but not really. I woke up this morning and I just knew Max was in trouble. I knew someone had left him here, and I knew he was scared and alone." Before anyone could process this cryptic response further, an elderly woman came hurrying across the lot, her grey hair wild and her bathrobe flapping open to reveal hastily thrown-on clothes underneath. "Emily Marie Hartwell," she called, breathing heavily. "You nearly gave me a heart attack running off like that." Grandma Rose, "Look." Emily pointed toward the dog, who had turned his blindfolded head toward the sound of the approaching woman. "They hurt Max. Someone put that thing on his eyes, and they left him here with the suitcase, and he's so sad. Sad." Rose Hartwell took in the scene with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She was a woman in her 70s, but her bearing suggested someone who had faced down plenty of challenges in her time. When her gaze fell on the suitcase, something shifted in her expression, a flicker of recognition perhaps, or memory. "That suitcase," she murmured, moving closer, despite Dr. Torres's gestured warning. "I've seen it before." The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the unfolding mystery. Here was a blindfolded dog apparently known to a little girl who claimed impossible things. Here was an old suitcase that seemed to trigger memories in an elderly woman. And here was a child who somehow knew to come to this place at this precise moment. Max, as Emily had called him, remained perfectly still through all the human drama swirling around him, but his head stayed turned toward the little girl, and his tail continued its slow, steady beat against the ground. Whatever cruel purpose had brought him to this place. Whatever message his abandonment was meant to send, it was clear that Emily's arrival had changed everything. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the mist, but the mystery deepened with each passing moment. The suitcase, the girl and her grandmother, all pieces of a puzzle that none of the assembled adults could yet comprehend. What they didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The Millbrook police station conference room had never hosted. A stranger gathering Emily sat in a chair too large for her small frame, her legs dangling as she clutched a cup of hot chocolate that Officer Martinez had brought from the vending machine. Across from her sat Detective Sarah Blackwood, a woman whose gentle demeanor masked 15 years of investigating the town's darkest secrets. To Emily's left, her grandmother Rose maintained a protective presence, one weathered hand resting on her granddaughter's shoulder. But it was the figure by the window that commanded the room's attention. Max, if that was indeed his name, lay on a borrowed blanket, his blindfold finally removed to reveal intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything. Dr. Torres had examined him thoroughly and found no signs of physical abuse, but the psychological impact of his ordeal was evident in the way he stayed close to Emily, as if afraid she might disappear. Emily, Detective Blackwood said softly, "I need you to tell me everything you remember about that night in the woods, everything, even the parts that might sound strange to grown-ups." The little girl took a shaky sip of her chocolate, her eyes never leaving Max's face. "It was July 15th. I remember because it was the day after my birthday, and Mama had let me stay up late the night before I went for a walk after dinner, just to the edge of the woods, like I always did. But this time, I saw something shiny in the trees." "What kind of shiny?" Blackwood prompted. Like metal, but old metal, tarnished." Grandma Rose would say. Emily glanced at her grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. "It was buried under some leaves, and when I dug it out, it was a dog tag, but not like the ones regular dogs wear. It was military." The adults in the room exchanged glances. This detail hadn't appeared in any of the previous reports about Emily's disappearance. "What did the dog tag say?" Blackwood asked, leaning forward. Emily closed her eyes as if reading from memory. It said K9 Unit 47 and had some numbers and a name. "Sergeant Rex. But that's not Max's name, I know, because when I called him Rex, he didn't come. He only answers to Max Doctor." Torres made a note in her file. Military working dogs were often given new names when they retired or were rehomed, but the presence of military identification suggested a connection to something official and potentially dangerous. "Tell me about getting lost." Blackwood continued. "I wasn't really lost." At first, Emily admitted, her voice small. "I followed a path deeper into the woods, because I wanted to find where the dog tag came from. I thought maybe there were more buried things, like treasure. But the path just kept going and going, and when I tried to go back, all the trees looked the same." Rose squeezed her granddaughter's shoulder gently. "You should have called for help right away." "Sweetheart, I did, Grandma. I called and called. But my voice just got swallowed up by the forest, and then it started getting dark. And I heard noises, not animal noises, but like machines, like trucks or something heavy, moving through the trees." Detective Blackwood's pen stopped moving. "Trucks? In Pinehurst Woods?" "That's when I got really scared." Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found a big rock to hide behind, and I was crying because I thought no one would ever find me. That's when Max appeared." The German shepherd's ears pricked up at the sound of his name, and he moved closer to Emily's chair, resting his large head on her knee. He didn't make any sound. Emily said, stroking Max's fur. "1 minute I was alone, and the next minute he was just there, like a shadow that became real. He was wearing something around his neck, not a regular collar, but like a vest with pockets, a tactical vest." Dr. Torres murmured. "Military working dogs wear them for gear and protection." Max sat down next to my rock and just waited. When I reached out to pet him, he let me, but he kept looking toward where the machine sounds were coming from. It was like he was guarding me from something. Detective Blackwood felt the familiar tingle that came when a case was about to break open. Emily, this is very important. Did you see the trucks? Did you see who was making the noise? Emily nodded slowly. Max took me closer. We stayed hidden in the bushes, but I could see them, big military trucks with canvas covers and men in uniforms loading things into them. Heavy things that clinked like metal. What kind of uniforms? Not like the police uniforms. These were different, darker, and the men kept looking around like they were scared of getting caught. The room fell silent, except for the soft sound of Max's breathing. Rose Hartwell's face had gone pale, and her hand gripped her granddaughter's shoulder. Tighter. "There's more," Emily said. Quietly, Max led me to a place where I could see better. One of the trucks had its back open, and inside there were suitcases. Lots of them. Old leather ones, just like the one they left with Max this morning. Detective Blackwood felt her pulse quicken. How many suitcases? Maybe 20. They were all the same kind, all old and brown, and the men were being really careful with them, like they were full of something breakable or dangerous. Dr. Torres leaned forward. Emily, did Max seem to recognize these people? Did he react to them in any way? He got really tense, Emily said unconsciously, mimicking the rigid posture she remembered. His muscles were all tight, and he made this low sound in his throat. Not a growl exactly, but like he was angry and sad at the same time. What happened next? We watched for a long time. Max wouldn't let me move until all the trucks were gone. Then he led me back to the rock where he found me, and we stayed there all night. He kept me warm, and every time I got scared, he would lick my hand or nudge me with his nose. But Emily, Detective Blackwood said gently, when the search teams found you the next morning, you were alone. Where did Max go? Emily's eyes filled with tears again. Just before the sun came up, he started, acting strange. He kept looking toward the edge of the woods, and his ears were up like he heard something I couldn't. Here then he stood up and looked at me for a long time, like he was trying to tell me something important. She paused to wipe her eyes with the back of her hand. He took off his vest and buried it under some leaves near the rock. Then he licked my face one more time and ran away. When the search people found me an hour later, it was like he'd never been there at all. Did you tell the search team about Max? I tried, but they said I must have dreamed it because there were no dog tracks around. Where I was sitting, they said sometimes people imagine things when they're scared and alone. Rose finally spoke up, her voice tight with emotion. But you knew better, didn't you, sweetheart? Emily nodded emphatically. Max was real. He saved me. And somehow, he knew I needed him again today. Detective Blackwood stood and began pacing the small room, military trucks in Pinehurst Woods. Suitcases being moved under cover of darkness, a trained German shepherd with apparent knowledge of covert operations. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was one that opened more questions than it answered. Emily, she said finally, when you woke up this morning and knew Max was in trouble, did you know anything else? Did you have any sense of who might have left him at the lot? Emily's face scrunched in concentration. It wasn't clear like remembering a dream, but I felt like someone was angry at Max for something, someone who used to trust him but doesn't anymore. And I think she hesitated, looking up at her grandmother for reassurance. Go on, sweetheart. Rose encouraged. I think Max used to work for these people, the ones with the trucks. But something happened that made them not want him anymore. Something that made them want to hurt him, but not kill him, like they wanted him to suffer. The blindfold suddenly took on new significance, not just cruelty for its own sake, but a symbolic gesture. A way of saying that Max was no longer allowed to see, no longer trusted to witness whatever operations his former handlers were conducting. Dr. Torres made another note. We should have his microchip scanned, see if there's any official registration information. Already done. Detective Blackwood replied, That's the strange thing. He's not chipped. For a dog with apparent military training, that's highly unusual. It's almost like someone went to great lengths to erase his official identity. Max suddenly raised his head, his attention focused on something beyond the conference room window. His ears were forward alert, and a low rumble emanated from his chest. Not quite a growl, but a warning, Emily noticed immediately. What is it, Max? What do you hear? Before anyone could answer, Max was on his feet and moving toward the window. His body language had shifted from relaxed to protective in an instant, and he positioned himself between Emily and whatever had caught his attention, outside. Detective Blackwood moved to the window and peered out at the parking lot below. At first glance, everything appeared normal. A few civilian cars, the usual police cruisers, pedestrians going about their morning routines. But then she spotted it, a dark sedan with tinted windows parked across the street in a position that offered a clear view of the police station's main entrance. How long has that car been there? She asked. The room Rose joined her at the window. It wasn't there when we arrived. I would have noticed. As if sensing their scrutiny, the sedan's engine started and it pulled smoothly, away from the curb, but not before Detective Blackwood caught a glimpse of the license plate. Government issued the kind used by federal agencies. Max remained alert until the vehicle disappeared around the corner, then returned to Emily's side. But his message was clear. They were being watched. Detective Blackwood, Emily said quietly. I think the people who hurt Max know we found him, and I don't think they're happy about it. The detective looked down at the brave little girl and her loyal canine protector, realizing that what had started as a simple case of animal abandonment was rapidly becoming something much more dangerous. The suitcase, the military connection, the covert surveillance, all signs pointed to a conspiracy that someone was willing to go to great lengths to keep buried, but they had underestimated two things: the bond between a little girl and the dog who had saved her life, and the determination of a small-town police force to protect their own. The real story was just beginning to unfold. The knock on the police station door came at precisely 3:17 p.m., just as Detective Blackwood was reviewing Emily's statement for the fourth time. Officer Martinez looked up from his desk, surprised by the visitor's timing. Most walk-ins came during normal business hours, not during the afternoon lull, when the station operated with minimal staff. The woman standing in the doorway carried herself with unmistakable military bearing. She was perhaps 45, with prematurely silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of the room in a single sweep. Her civilian clothes, dark jeans, a simple black sweater, and worn combat boots couldn't disguise the alert posture of someone trained to assess threats and respond accordingly. I'm here about the German Shepherd, she said, without preamble. The one you found this morning with the suitcase. Martinez gestured toward the conference room. Detective Blackwood is handling. In that case, let me get her for you. But Sarah Blackwood had already emerged from the conference room, drawn by the authoritative tone of the newcomer's voice. Something about the woman's presence set off the same internal alarm that had been sounding since the mysterious sedan's appearance. I'm Detective Blackwood. And you are? Sarah Mitchell. Captain Sarah Mitchell. U.S. Army, retired. The woman's handshake was firm, brief, and entirely professional. I understand you have questions about a German Shepherd. Named Max, the detective's eyebrows rose. They hadn't released the dog's name to the media, and only a handful of people knew it. How did you know his name? Because he belonged to my late husband's unit. Sergeant Marcus Mitchell, K-9 handler, 47th Military Police Battalion. He was killed in action 18 months ago, along with his primary partner, a German shepherd named Rex. The pieces of Emily's story suddenly snapped into sharper focus. Rex, Detective Blackwood murmured, "Emily found a dog tag with that name." Sarah's composed expression flickered for just a moment. Surprise, recognition, and something deeper. "May I see the dog? He's not here at the station." We moved him to a secure location after Detective Blackwood paused, choosing her words. Carefully, after we noticed some unusual interest in the case, the black sedan with federal plates, Sarah said matter-of-factly. "I saw it when I arrived. They've been following me for the past 6 months." Detective Blackwood felt the familiar chill of a case spiraling into dangerous territory. "Mrs. Mitchell, I think you'd better tell me everything you know, and I mean everything." 20 minutes later, Sarah Mitchell sat in the same conference room where Emily had told her story, but her version painted a much darker picture of the events that had brought Max to Millbrook. Marcus and Rex were part of a classified operation in Syria. Sarah began, her voice steady, but her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Officially, they were conducting routine security sweeps of supply convoys. Unofficially, they were investigating reports of stolen military equipment being sold on the black market. Detective Blackwood had her notebook out, but she sensed this conversation would benefit from careful discretion. What kind of equipment? Everything: weapons, ammunition, communications, gear, even vehicles. Someone with high-level access was systematically looting supply depots and selling the materials to the highest bidder. Marcus's unit was tasked with identifying the source of the leaks, and they found something. Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Oh, they found something, all right. The operation went all the way to the top. Officers, civilian contractors, even people back here in the States. Marcus managed to document everything before." She paused, composing herself, "before the convoy. He was riding and hit an IED that intelligence suggests wasn't planted by enemy forces. The implications hung heavy in the air." Detective Blackwood had investigated her share of cover-ups over the years, but nothing approaching this scale. Rex was in the convoy too? "That's what I was told. Both Marcus and Rex killed instantly, no remains recovered. Due to the severity of the blast, I was presented with folded flags and empty coffins and assured that justice would be served." Sarah's voice grew harder. Except justice never came. The investigation was classified, the files sealed, and everyone involved in the black market operation seemed to vanish into bureaucratic protection. But Max, survived, apparently so. And if Max is alive, then there's a very good chance that Marcus's evidence survived too. That suitcase your witness described, I'm betting it contains documentation that certain powerful people have spent 18 months trying to bury. Detective Blackwood thought about Emily's description of the nighttime convoy in Pinehurst Woods. "Mrs. Mitchell, is it possible that this black market operation is still ongoing? That they're still moving stolen equipment?" Sarah nodded grimly. "More than possible. Marcus's death didn't end the investigation, it just drove it deeper underground. There are other military families who've lost people under suspicious circumstances, other cases where the official reports don't match the evidence. And you think whoever killed your husband is now trying to silence Max? I think Max knows things that could destroy careers, end lucrative contracts, and send people to prison for treason." The blindfold wasn't just cruelty. It was a message. See no evil, speak no evil. But they made one crucial mistake. What's that? They underestimated the bond between a military working dog and civilian population. He's sworn to protect Max. Didn't just survive that convoy attack. He's been watching, waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. And somehow he found that moment in a little girl who needed saving. As if summoned by the conversation, Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway. "Detective, sorry to interrupt, but we just got a call from the Hartwell residence. Someone broke in while the grandmother was at the grocery store. The place has been turned upside down. Detective Blackwood and Sarah Mitchell locked eyes, both understanding the implication. Immediately. The search had begun. Any sign of Emily? Blackwood asked, already reaching. For her jacket, she's fine. She was at a friend's house, but Mrs. Hartwell is pretty shaken up. She says they didn't take anything valuable, just tore the place apart, like they were looking for something specific. Sarah stood as well. Detective, I need to see that dog, and I need to see him now, because if I'm right about what Max knows, Emily and her grandmother are in serious danger. The drive to the county animal shelter took 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Sarah Mitchell stared out the passenger window, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. She'd spent 18 months following paper trails, filing FOIA requests, and attending meetings with military officials who spoke in carefully worded non-answers, but sitting in a small-town police car with a detective who seemed genuinely committed to uncovering the truth. She felt something she hadn't experienced since Marcus's death. Hope Dr. Torres met them at the shelter's main entrance, her expression grave. He's been agitated all afternoon, she reported, pacing, whining, like he knows something's wrong. We've had to move him to an isolation kennel for his own safety and ours. They found Max in a large, secure run at the back of the facility. The moment Sarah Mitchell appeared, the German shepherd froze. His intelligent brown eyes locked onto her face, and his entire body went rigid with recognition. "Hello, boy," Sarah said softly, approaching the kennel door. "I'm Sarah Marcus, was my husband." Max's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. He dropped to his belly and began to crawl forward, his powerful body trembling with emotion. When he reached the chain-link barrier, he pressed his nose through the gaps and released a sound that was part whine, part howl, the unmistakable cry of a dog mourning his lost handler. Sarah knelt beside the kennel and extended her hand. Max pressed his face against her palm, and for a moment, both dog and woman seemed to share their grief for the man they'd both loved. "And lost, he remembers you," Dr. Torres observed quietly. "More than that," Sarah replied, studying Max's face. "He's trying to tell me something Marcus always said. Max was the smartest dog he'd ever worked with, capable of complex problem-solving, excellent memory, almost human-level intuition about people's motivations." Detective Blackwood watched the interaction with growing unease. "Mrs. Mitchell, if Max has been hiding evidence for 18 months, where would he have put it?" Emily said he buried his tactical vest in the woods, but a search team would have found it by now. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the police station. Not if Max didn't want them to find it. Military working dogs are trained to cache supplies, hide. Equipment even conceal themselves for extended periods. If Max has been protecting something, he would have chosen a location that only he could access, or only someone he trusted could access. Dr. Torres added thoughtfully. They all turned to look at Max, who had risen to his feet and was now pacing the kennel with obvious agitation. His eyes kept darting between Sarah and the door, and his behavior suggested urgency, as if he were trying to communicate that time was running out. "We need to get." "Emily," Detective Blackwood said suddenly, "if Max is trying to show us where he hid Marcus's evidence, he'll need her help to do it." Sarah nodded, but her expression was troubled. "Detective, I should warn you, the people behind this conspiracy have been eliminating witnesses for over a year. If we're right about what Max knows, and if they realize we're getting close to the truth, they won't hesitate to take more drastic action." "You mean they might try to hurt Emily?" "I mean, they might try to eliminate everyone connected to this case. You mean Emily, her grandmother, anyone who could potentially testify about what they've discovered." Max suddenly barked, once sharp and commanding, the kind of bark trained military dogs use to alert their handlers to immediate danger. All three humans turned toward the kennel's main entrance, where the sound of approaching vehicles could be heard over the normal shelter noise. Dr. Torres checked her watch. We're not expecting any deliveries or pickups today. Through the windows of the isolation area, they could see black SUVs pulling into the parking lot, 3 of them with tinted windows and government plates. Men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Back. Exit. Sarah commanded her military training, taking over now, but Max was already 1 step ahead of them. Somehow, the clever German shepherd had managed to work the latch on his kennel door, and he was now free and moving toward the rear of the building. His message was clear: "Follow me if you want to live," as they fled through the shelter's back door. Detective Blackwood couldn't help but wonder if they were already too late. The conspiracy Sarah Mitchell described was far-reaching and ruthless, and they had just painted targets on their backs by getting too close to the truth. But Max seemed to know exactly where he was going, and for the first time in 18 months they had a chance to expose the corruption that had cost so many lives. The final confrontation was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. The old water treatment plant on the outskirts of Millbrook had been abandoned for 3 years, a victim of budget cuts and bureaucratic indifference. Its massive concrete structures and rusted machinery created a labyrinth of shadows and echoes, the perfect place for a fugitive German shepherd to lead 3 humans who were quickly learning they'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple case of animal abandonment. Max moved through the facility with the confidence of familiarity, his paws silent on the cracked concrete floors. Behind him, Detective Blackwood, Sarah Mitchell and Dr. Torres followed as quietly as possible, constantly checking over their shoulders. For signs of pursuit, the black SUVs had arrived at the animal shelter within minutes of their escape, confirming Sarah's worst fears about the scope and determination of the conspiracy they faced. "How does he know this place so well?" Detective Blackwood whispered as they navigated a corridor lined with massive pipes and defunct control panels. "Military working dogs are taught to scout and memorize terrain." Sarah replied, her voice equally quiet. "If Max has been operating independently for 18 months, he would have established multiple safe houses and cache points throughout the area." They emerged into what had once been the main processing chamber, a cavernous space dominated by empty concrete pools and overhead catwalks. Afternoon sunlight streamed through broken skylights, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to shift with every cloud passing overhead. Max paused at the edge of the largest pool and looked back at his human companions. His message was clear: "We're here, Doctor." Torres peered into the empty basin. "It's at least 20 feet deep. How are we supposed to get down there?" Sarah was already examining the maintenance ladder built into the pool's concrete wall. These old facilities always have service access. The question is whether the ladder is still safe to use. Detective Blackwood tested the first few rungs with her weight, then nodded. "Seems solid enough. But I'm not going down there without backup on the way." She pulled out her radio and called for additional units, carefully avoiding specific details about their location. The last thing they needed was for the wrong people to intercept their communications and arrive before legitimate law enforcement. Max, however, was growing increasingly agitated. Paced the pool's perimeter, occasionally stopping to bark down into the depths. Not the sharp, alert bark they'd heard at the shelter, but a different vocalization entirely. This was the bark of a dog who had found what he was looking for and needed. His pack to understand the significance of the discovery. "He's trying to tell us something's down there," Sarah observed. "Something important enough that he's maintained a presence at this location for over a year." One by one they descended into the empty pool. The concrete walls were stained with algae and mineral deposits, evidence of the facility's former function, but the bottom was surprisingly clean and dry. Max immediately moved to the far corner where a maintenance access panel had been. Partially concealed behind a carefully arranged pile of debris using her flashlight, Detective Blackwood illuminated the area while Sarah and Dr. Torres worked to clear away the camouflaged materials. What they revealed made all three humans catch their breath in astonishment. Behind the access panel was a weatherproof military-grade storage container, and beside it sat the familiar brown leather suitcase from that morning's discovery. But this suitcase was different, older, more worn, and secured with additional straps and locks that spoke of precious cargo carefully protected. "My God," Sarah whispered, recognizing military equipment when she saw it. "Max, you brilliant boy. You've been guarding Marcus's evidence all this time." Max sat beside the suitcase and placed one paw protectively on its lid, his brown eyes meeting Sarah's with an intensity that seemed almost human. He was a soldier reporting for duty, ready to finally deliver the intelligence he'd been protecting at the cost of everything else in his life. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she worked the locks using techniques Marcus had taught her years ago for handling secured military containers. The first lock clicked open, then the second. The final clasp gave way. With a soft sound that seemed to echo through the empty pool like a gunshot, inside, the suitcase was a carefully organized archive of treason, digital drives, photographs, shipping manifests, financial records, and communications logs. All meticulously documented and preserved. But it was the handwritten journal on top that made Sarah's vision blur with tears, Marcus's field notes. She said, her voice breaking, he documented everything. Names, dates, amounts, transportation routes. The entire operation is laid out here. Detective Blackwood photographed each item with her phone, while Dr. Torres kept watch at the pool's edge above them. The scope of the corruption was staggering. High-ranking military officers, defense contractors, transportation companies, and even some congressional staffers, all participating in a systematic theft of military equipment that had generated millions in illegal profits. "Look at this," Detective Blackwood said, pointing to a series of photographs. "These show the same trucks," Emily described, but the photos are dated over 2 years ago. This operation has been going on far longer than we thought. Sarah studied the shipping manifests, her military experience helping her decode the various codes and routing information. They were using official supply convoys as cover, replacing real equipment with decoys and funneling the stolen materials through a network of shell companies. The buyers included foreign governments, terrorist organizations, and domestic militia groups. "And your husband uncovered all of this?" Marcus and Rex spent months gathering this intelligence. They were close to exposing the entire network when Sarah's voice trailed off as she found a final entry in Marcus's journal, dated just 3 days before. His death. Evidence cache established at secondary location. She read aloud, "Rex knows the site. If anything happens to me, the dog will lead the right people to the truth. Trust him. He's smarter than most of the officers I've served with, and twice." As Loyal Max whined softly at the sound of his fallen handler's words, as if he understood that his long vigil was finally coming to an end. But their moment of triumph was shattered by the sound of vehicles approaching the treatment plant. Through the broken skylights above, they could see the distinctive shapes of helicopters circling the facility, black aircraft with no identifying markings, the kind used by agencies that didn't officially exist. "They found us," Dr. Torres called down from her lookout position. "Multiple vehicles, armed personnel, and they're surrounding the building." Sarah quickly began repacking the evidence, her movements swift and efficient. "We need to get this information to someone we can trust. Media, federal investigators. Anyone with the authority and integrity to act on it. "Wait," Detective Blackwood said, studying one of the shipping manifests more closely. "These recent dates, some of this activity happened after your husband's death. The operation didn't end with Marcus's murder. It just became more careful. The implications were chilling. If the conspiracy was still active, then Emily's sighting in Pinehurst Woods hadn't been a one-time occurrence. The illegal arms trafficking was ongoing, and the perpetrators had been using the cover of Marcus's death to operate with. Impunity Max suddenly barked once and moved toward a different section of the pool wall. His behavior suggested he wasn't finished revealing secrets. There was more to show them. "Another cache?" Sarah asked, but Max was already scratching at what appeared to be solid concrete. Closer inspection revealed another hidden panel, this one containing something that made Detective Blackwood's blood run cold. Inside was Emily's missing backpack from her night in the woods, along with a child's digital camera. She lied. Dr. Torres realized Emily didn't just stumble across that convoy, she photographed it. Detective Blackwood turned on the camera, and its small screen filled with images that corroborated every detail of Emily's story. The military, trucks, the uniformed figures, the careful loading of identical suitcases, all documented by an 8-year-old girl who had been in the wrong place at the right time. But the final photos on the camera made Sarah gasp with recognition. Clear images of faces, including a man in an officer's uniform that she knew all too well, Colonel James Hartford. She said, her voice filled with rage and vindication. Marcus's commanding officer, the man who delivered the news of his death, who assured me that justice would be served, who attended the memorial service with tears in his eyes. The pieces of the conspiracy fell into place with devastating clarity. Colonel Hartford hadn't just covered up the black market operation, he'd been running it. Marcus's investigation had gotten too close to the truth, so Hartford had arranged for his elimination while maintaining his cover as the grieving commander. Above them, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the treatment plant. Voices shouted orders, and the systematic search of the facility began. They had minutes, perhaps less, before discovery. "Max," Sarah said urgently, "we need another way out. Can you show us?" The German shepherd looked at her with those intelligent brown eyes, then at the suitcase full of evidence, then back at her. His message was unmistakable. The choice was between escape and justice, and he was leaving the decision to the humans. He'd learned to trust Detective Blackwood, made the choice for all of them. She grabbed the digital drives containing the most damning evidence and stuffed them into her jacket pockets. Dr. Torres call, Channel 7 News. "Tell them Detective Sarah Blackwood has a story that will make national headlines, and give them our GPS coordinates." "What about the rest of the evidence?" Sarah asked. "We split up. You and Max take the suitcase and find another exit. I'll create a distraction and get these drives to the media. Even if they silence us, the truth will still come out." It was a desperate plan, but Max seemed to approve. He picked up Emily's backpack in his teeth and moved toward the maintenance ladder, ready to guide Sarah to safety, while Detective Blackwood faced whatever was coming through the treatment plant's main entrance. As they prepared to separate, Sarah grabbed Detective Blackwood's arm. "If we don't make it out of here, promise me something. Tell Emily that Max kept his promise to Marcus. Tell her that sometimes the most important battles are fought by the smallest soldiers." Sound of boots on metal catwalks above them confirmed that time had run out. The final confrontation Sarah had predicted was about to begin, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The evidence in that suitcase represented not just justice for Marcus and Rex, but protection for Emily and every other potential victim of the conspiracy's ruthless reach. Max barked once more, not in alarm, but in determination. After 18 months of hiding, waiting, and protecting the truth, he was ready to fight. For it, the Millbrook Town Square had never witnessed anything like the scene unfolding on this crisp October morning. News vans from 3 major networks ringed the small park, their satellite dishes reaching toward a cloudless sky that seemed to promise clarity. After so much darkness, FBI agents in distinctive blue windbreakers worked alongside state police investigators, their careful documentation of evidence creating a bureaucratic ballet around the weathered gazebo where the town's founders had once delivered speeches about justice and democracy. At the center of it all sat Emily Hartwell, no longer the frightened little girl who had run crying to an abandoned dog 3 weeks earlier. Her small hands held a microphone almost as large as her head, and her clear voice carried across the square with a confidence that belied her 8 years. "Max isn't just my dog," she said, looking directly into the camera lens with the fearless honesty that only children possess. "He's a hero who kept a promise to a soldier who died fighting bad people, and he protected me because that's what good dogs do. They protect their families." Beside her, Max sat at perfect attention in his new collar, not the utilitarian gear of his military service, but a rich blue leather band adorned with a medal that caught the morning light. The Presidential Medal of Freedom for Civilian Service, personally bestowed by a president who had flown to Millbrook when the story broke nationally. It was an unprecedented honor for a dog. But then again, Max's service had been unprecedented in its scope and sacrifice. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the crowd, tears streaming down her face as she watched justice finally being served. The suitcase that Max had protected for 18 months had yielded enough evidence to topple what investigators were calling the largest military corruption scandal in modern American history. 47 people had been arrested, including Colonel James Hartford, whose carefully constructed facade of honor had crumbled under the weight of documented treason. Detective Blackwood, now working with a joint task force investigating similar corruption cases across multiple military installations, caught Sarah's eye and nodded. The older woman had become something of a celebrity herself, the widow who refused to let her husband's death be covered up, whose determination had helped expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. But it was the presence of other families that made this moment truly meaningful. Parents, spouses, and children of soldiers who had died under suspicious circumstances, all of whom had been told their loved ones were casualties of war rather than victims of greed. Marcus Mitchell's sacrifice had finally been recognized, but more importantly, it had paved the way for justice for dozens of other service members whose deaths had been orchestrated to protect illegal profits. Rose Hartwell adjusted her best dress and stepped forward to the podium. At 73, she had become an unlikely spokesperson for military families, demanding accountability. Her sharp wit and uncompromising integrity, making her a favorite of news producers and congressional investigators alike. "When my granddaughter came running home that morning crying about a dog in trouble, I never imagined we'd end up here." She began, her voice steady, despite the emotion in her eyes. But that's the thing about truth. It has a way of surfacing, especially when good people refuse to look away from injustice. The crowd applauded, and Max's tail thumped against the platform. He seemed to understand that this gathering was important, that the attention focused on him represented something larger than one dog's loyalty to one fallen soldier. Emily stood again, this time without the microphone, and walked to where Max waited. She knelt beside him and wrapped her small arms around his neck, whispering something that only he could hear. The German shepherd's brown eyes closed briefly, and for a moment the weight of his long vigil seemed to lift from his shoulders. Dr. Torres, who had become Max's official veterinarian and an expert witness in the federal investigation, watched the interaction with professional satisfaction. The psychological trauma of Max's ordeal was healing, aided by the steady presence of the little girl who had given him a reason to trust humans again. His transformation from a broken, blindfolded animal to a confident, celebrated hero was a testament to the resilience of both dogs and the people who loved them. FBI. Special Agent Jennifer Chen stepped to the podium, her expression serious as she addressed the assembled crowd and cameras. The evidence recovered through the cooperation of civilian witnesses and the extraordinary service of a military working dog has resulted in the disruption of an international arms trafficking network. The financial damage to American security interests exceeded $200 million, while the human cost, the deaths of at least 37 military personnel, cannot be measured in any currency. She paused her gaze, finding Sarah Mitchell in the crowd. But today isn't just about prosecuting criminals, it's about honoring the sacrifice of soldiers. Like Sergeant Marcus Mitchell, whose dedication to duty continued even after his death through the loyalty of his four-legged partner. The formal ceremony concluded with the reading of Marcus's final journal entry, his words about trusting Max's intelligence and loyalty taking on prophetic significance in light of everything that had followed. As his widow listened to her husband's voice echoing across the town square, Sarah felt a peace that had eluded her for 18 months. But the most moving moment came when Emily approached the microphone one final time, her young voice carrying a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. People asked me if I was scared when I found Max in the woods that night, or when the bad people started watching our house, or when we had to hide at the water plant, she said. But I was never scared when Max was with me. He taught me that sometimes being brave means doing the right thing, even when it's hard, and sometimes keeping promises means waiting a really long time to keep them. She looked down at Max, who had remained perfectly still throughout the ceremony. Max kept his promise to Sergeant Mitchell. He protected the truth until someone could do something about it. And he protected me, because that's what heroes do. The applause was thunderous, but Max only had eyes for Emily. The bond between them had transcended the circumstances that brought them together, evolving into something that would last for the rest of their lives. She was no longer the lost little girl in the woods, and he was no longer the abandoned dog by the suitcase. They were family now, connected by shared experience and mutual devotion. As the crowd began to disperse and the news crews packed their equipment, Sarah Mitchell approached Emily and Max. The three of them stood together in comfortable silence, watching as Millbrook returned to its normal rhythm after hosting one of the most significant military justice events in recent memory. "What happens now?" Emily asked. Still stroking Max's fur, Sarah smiled, the first truly happy expression she'd worn in over a year. "Now Max gets to be a dog again. No more secrets, no more hiding, no more protecting evidence. Just playing fetch and sleeping in the sunshine and being loved by people who understand what he sacrificed for all of us. And the bad people will go to prison for a very long time, and other soldiers will be safer because of what Max helped us discover." Emily nodded, satisfied with this answer. At 8 years old, she had learned lessons about justice, loyalty, and courage that many adults never fully grasp. But perhaps more importantly, she had learned that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption is the unwavering devotion of a dog who refuses to abandon his duty. As they walked away from the town square, Max trotting contentedly between Emily and Sarah, the autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet with a sound like applause. Behind them, the gazebo stood empty again, ready for the next generation of citizens who would gather there to demand justice and speak truth to power. The suitcase that had started it all was now sealed in an evidence vault, its contents having already changed the course of military justice and exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of American government. But its real legacy wasn't the convictions it had secured or the careers it had destroyed. It was the reminder that truth, like love, has a way of surviving even the most determined efforts to bury it. Max had kept his promise to Marcus Mitchell, and in doing so, he had kept faith with every service member who had ever trusted their life to a four-legged partner. The blindfold, that had once symbolized his silencing, had been replaced with a medal that honored his voice, and the empty suitcase that had marked his abandonment had revealed the full suitcase that contained his vindication. On that perfect autumn morning in Millbrook, justice wasn't just served, it was celebrated by the very community that had almost overlooked it. And at the center of it all, a German shepherd named Max finally laid down the burden he had carried for 18 months, content in the knowledge that his handler's final mission was complete. The tears that had begun with a little girl's cry of recognition had ended with a nation's acknowledgement of a dog's extraordinary service. Sometimes the most important battles are indeed fought by the smallest soldiers, and sometimes the greatest victories belong to those who never forgot what they were fighting for.